Support for Carolina Business Review made possible by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries, headquartered in Hartsville since 1899. And by Business North Carolina Magazine. There's a place for those who subscribe to the theory that business doesn't have to be boring.
Along with empty homes and shuttered storefronts, the number of our neighbors who are still out of work is the barometer by which many of us still measure how far we have come in our economic recovery. Thanks so much for joining us for the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Mark Boone, in this week for Chris William. On this broadcast, we will talk with the state chamber chiefs on what the state's governors call job number one, getting the Carolinas unemployed back to work.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. And by Novant Health, a not-for-profit group of hospitals and physician clinics, ranked as one of our nation's 10 best healthcare systems, caring for patients and communities in North and South Carolina. Major funding also by King & Spalding, an international law firm with over 800 lawyers in 13 offices worldwide, providing legal services to clients in the Carolinas and throughout the world. For more information, visit www.kslaw.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded July 22nd, 2011. On this week's program, S. Lewis Ebert of the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce and Otis Rawl of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. Now, Mark Boone.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here for the program today. I know you guys are regulars and will help me get through this next half hour, sitting in here for Chris. And Lou, I'll start with you. The latest numbers from the State Employment Commission show the jobless rate here in North Carolina just slightly below double digits. What does that really mean? Does it tie into the seasonal employment that we have going on during the summer?
I think it does a little bit, but I think it continues to show what I think most economists have been saying in North Carolina for some time, and that is the unemployment rate this year will probably be the same at the end of the year it was at the beginning of the year. So I still think we're seeing a very persistent, what they would call jobless recovery across the state. And that number is a source of real concern to business leaders and I think political leaders in Raleigh.
And the number of jobless claims in South Carolina higher than the state of North Carolina, but yet we saw some recent swirl around the numbers that Governor Nikki Haley has presented as far as the number of jobs created by her administration. What does that number really mean, and how many jobs have been created?
Well, I'm not sure, Mark, it really means anything. Most of the economic development forecasts are jobs that are creating now 2 or 3 years down the road. And what really becomes important is existing businesses that are getting back engaged. And in South Carolina, I think the market is based on how many new manufacturing jobs we go create over the next 6 to 8, 12 months, that period, and also what happens to the housing industry. That's always been a great barometer in South Carolina on how our economy goes. And if we can get through this whole issue of financing, getting homes back filled, and construction started, I think we'll pick back up pretty quickly.
We've seen a number of industry announcements with great fanfare about companies expanding, about headquarters that are moving to the Carolinas. But these jobs, a few hundred or a couple thousand at a time, are spread over several years. Right. What kind of impact is this having, at least in the short term, in the Carolinas?
Well, at least from our standpoint, I think the announcement for Boeing a year or so ago was a big shot in the arm for South Carolina. And it created a lot of hope for businesses and also for future employees with new jobs, spin-off companies that were coming as suppliers to Boeing. That's starting to come to fruition now. So we're starting to see the number of applications for UI claims starting to go down. The seasonal side of it is ending, and we'll be picking back up and ending about the time those jobs come on. So we're excited about what's going to happen in South Carolina, and we've addressed our UI issue in South Carolina, so we're excited.
And Lou, what is happening here in the state of North Carolina with the announcements, have we actually seen a net gain in jobs over the last couple of years? As you read the headlines of layoffs, but you read the headlines of job creation.
Well, I think the daunting number that UNC Charlotte economist John Connaughton shared with us about a year ago is for the decade that ended last year, North Carolina saw a net gain of 300 jobs statewide for the
300.
decade. 300. Yeah. So I think it does sort of sum up how significant the downturn was at the beginning of the decade, but how dramatic this downturn has been in North Carolina. 300,000 jobs lost. You know, so it's been devastating. And you get past the urban areas, which in many cases are doing fairly well. Some of the rural areas are seeing, you know, unemployment well up into the double digits. And the U6 indicator, you know, which shows the long-term unemployment number as high as 17 or 18%. So it's obviously a source of real concern. And I think from the North Carolina standpoint, I think probably the best, the most exciting news has been we've had a pro-business legislature this session really kind of get their arms around some things that they felt would make a bigger impact on creating some momentum around that number. So some big changes in workers' comp, tort reform, regulatory reform, and taxes at a time when, you know, businesses were telling us, just like I'm sure they're saying in every state, you know, we need predictability and certainty. We want to know what it costs to create a job, and we want to know what the long term looks like. So I think in our state, we're providing a better long-term outlook on many of those fronts.
Well, let's talk about what's going on the legislative front and in the political environment we're in right now, specifically when we're talking about economic incentives for luring in these new companies. We just went through this in South Carolina with Amazon and whether or not they should be given a tax break to locate in Lexington County. What kind of environment are we facing, and what about the folks who are saying, including I believe the Chamber, who don't believe that we should be granting tax breaks to large corporations?
Well, I think the issue is you've got to create a level playing field for all businesses, whether they're new businesses coming in or whether it's existing businesses. And I think that's the dilemma that chambers face every day. I think the other issue is we get so caught up in economic development issues, what it takes to get one company here versus another. And really what we should be looking at is regionally what's in the best interest of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I think international companies look at us as a region and not as a state. So if we can become competitive with the other global marketplaces, I think that's more important for us than just trying to pick and choose winners and losers within our system. And I think that's what any Chamber of Commerce is doing, is creating a business environment that's conducive for whatever business looking to locate it in your particular area of the country to make them profitable in what they're doing. And we need to get away from this competitiveness issues between states. Let's go recruit businesses into our regions. Let's make the Port of Charleston strong because that helps Georgia and North Carolina. Let's make our interstate systems for transfer of products and goods strong in all of our states. Let's figure out what we need to do from a business strategy as a region, and I think that's what we talk about at the Council of State Chambers when we get together. What's it take for our entire country to be strong from an economic development standpoint?
You mentioned some of the transportation infrastructure issues that a lot of businesses are looking at, but recently in North Carolina, of course, we've hung out fairly large carrots for Apple and Google, who don't necessarily need that transportation infrastructure to do business where they need to do business, but yet we've hung out fairly large packages that at least Google, I know, was in the $90 million range, I believe. It doesn't make sense to grant those kind of incentives for companies.
Well, I think in the end, I think every state and probably every state chamber is faced with the same dynamic. You probably don't want to be the only state in America that doesn't do that, and we certainly don't want to be either. I think, as Otis has said, I mean, I think states are busy working on their cost of doing business, their competitiveness. How can we work on our business climates to make it more attractive? Because I think in the end, all states offer incentives. All states are fighting to grow jobs and create opportunity. But in the end, it's focusing on some of the basics that, all things being equal, you know, that determines where jobs go and where jobs grow. And, you know, I think we're working real hard to make sure our states are on that key list of, you know, where those jobs end up.
Wall Street Journal just had a piece recently on the number of folks who have been out of work for at least a year. Both North and South Carolina, according to that story, are in the top 5. Do we have enough workforce development to get these folks into the positions that are being created?
I think, Mark, the issue, and we've dealt with this a lot in South Carolina. At any one given time, we got 30 to 50,000 vacant jobs in the state of South Carolina, but oftentimes where the people that have the qualifications are not where the jobs are being created. And I think that becomes the challenge of the business community, working with our technical colleges, our K through 12, our higher institutions of higher learning, to make sure that the skill sets are broad-based enough that wherever jobs are created, we've got a workforce that can fill those jobs. I think what we're seeing now is a change in dynamics, at least from the skill sets that are going to be needed to work in any business entity now. I mean, the traditional manufacturing of sweatshops and high volume labor has gone to robotics and really technical and requires a different skill set. So I think the challenge from the business community is, first, make sure people have the skill sets. And the second thing is, we know as the baby boomers move out of the workforce, we're going to have to create a new workforce from less people that are skilled differently than what we had before.
Well, Lou, of course, there have been cuts to higher education recently, especially at the community college level, where most of this technical education would be done. Do we have enough seats in the community college and technical college level to maintain the need that's out there?
I think we do. I think in the end, I think as Otis is indicating, and I think this is kind of a tough message, you know, there's not going to be, you know, the 300,000 jobs we lost in many cases probably aren't coming back. And when they do come back, they're going to be in a different form, and they're going to be in the form of high-skill, high-wage jobs. So I think definitely our community college system and higher ed systems are well-positioned. In North Carolina, everybody lives 30 miles away from a community college. But I think the other thing, when you talk about seats, they're also now wired. So we've invested $1.2 billion of new fiber in the ground in North Carolina, connecting all these community colleges. So there's a lot greater opportunity for folks to take advantage of higher learning, not necessarily by being in a seat. But I think that's probably the good news story, at least for North Carolina for the future, is we have companies investing heavily in technology and equipment. They're building capacity and they're increasing efficiency. Studies show that in our states, our workers are 10% more productive than other workers around the country. So I think we have probably a good news story to tell long term. And that's where I think we need to be looking. I think whether you're looking at cuts to budgets in our state or in Otis's state, I mean, 40 states had budget deficits this year, and they're pretty much all in the same boat. I think the distinguishing factor will be is how our states kind of rise above that and say, how do we make the best available opportunity of the talent we have, because I still think we have a strong talent pool in our state, and obviously a lot of economic and business horsepower to drive that.
So, Otis, where should the concentration be in job creation, and what industries are you all looking at?
Yeah, I think the jobs that we've lost in manufacturing is critical, not only in South Carolina, but the United States. And when you start looking at creation of jobs, you want to find the types of jobs that have value add, something where you add to the productivity or completion of that product. And, you know, it's easy to talk about service-related industries and all, but you still got to have that widget or that product that sells that you add value. And that's the only way you increase your state domestic product, is by adding value. So the concentration still has to be on manufacturing products, and the subsidiary companies that are affiliated with those manufacturing jobs will come. I think for our state, we need to go back to the Porter study that looked at clusters, and we need to figure out what businesses we need to recruit, where do they need to be located, and if it's the automotive cluster that we're dealing with right now, or whether it's tourism or whether it's agriculture. There's a lot of sophisticated businesses within all those clusters, particularly from a manufacturing standpoint, that adds value, and that's what we need more than anything else, is create domestic product increases within our state.
Of course, the healthcare industry has gotten a lot of attention the last couple of months, and we're excited next month to have Dr. John McConnell, the CEO of Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, will be on our program coming up in August, and we certainly hope you will join us for that edition of Carolina Business Review. Speaking of healthcare, there's been a lot of development, especially in the Triangle, pharmaceutical development, and those industries that support that. Is that still a growing industry in North Carolina?
It is. Actually, that biopharmaceutical cluster is one of the third largest in the country, behind California and Massachusetts, and growing. But much like in Otis's state, our state is a big manufacturing state. We're the third most dependent on manufacturing next to Indiana and Oregon in terms of our reliance on state GDP and manufacturing. I think the biopharma industry is alive and doing well, as is healthcare, information technology and communications, seeing a lot of activity around aviation, certainly healthcare, finance, energy, particularly here in the Charlotte area. This energy cluster is very significant. So again, I think there's some exciting developments happening as the economy reshuffles, and you know, we're certainly excited that this area is well positioned to take advantage of a lot of that.
Lou mentioned earlier some of the things that happened in the North Carolina legislature this last session. Immigration reform, one of the issues that the South Carolina legislature has addressed as of late, using both state licenses, driver's licenses, in the E-Verify system to document employment. But there is some concern in other states that once you roll these systems out, that immigrant workers may not be taking the jobs that they have previously. Does that leave a gap in the employment needs?
Yeah, I think in the agricultural sector, maybe so, but it goes back to that unemployment rate. Now, there are a lot of folks that are capable of working in South Carolina that don't necessarily want the job that they're offered. And I think with the reforms that we made in our trust fund reimbursements, cutting down the number of weeks, once the feds phase out their extensions, people are going to be back in the market looking for jobs. I think it's incumbent on the business community to make sure that we do all the proper things of hiring legal, qualified people in this state. And I think the whole E-Verify system, and we went through the whole Arizona, South Carolina debate this year, and it really gets back to businesses deciding who's going to get the jobs, whether we do the right things, because business is the only one that can control that. And I think government helps us intervene there by saying, look, you got to get off the unemployment rolls. You got to get off the welfare rolls. Here's the jobs, and jobs are available. And as long as you're being offered a job, you got to do that job. So there's a cost benefit on both sides, at least for the state, at least for our employers, and for our future employees. So immigration reform's not a bad thing. We've just got to make sure that we don't get to the point where we become so cumbersome on the people that are legally in South Carolina versus the people that are illegally in South Carolina. I mean, it's a delicate situation, but we're going to survive simply because we've got a workforce that we can do. Agriculture's got another question.
The same issue facing North Carolina farmers as well, correct?
It is. We did a version of E-Verify that was probably not immigration reform per se. That applies to companies above 25 or more employees. And again, I think what businesses in our state and probably most states are saying is, we want to follow the law. In many cases, they already are following the law and using E-Verify. So we've obviously found a way to make that work for companies of that size and up. And again, I think, as Otis indicated, there's plenty of folks that are in need of work. There's plenty of jobs. I think we're just both trying to get our states back to work.
Well, we are in the post-census redistricting cycle here, and we've seen some lines redrawn as of late. What does this mean, do you think, for future legislative sessions, at least the one upcoming? And is this purely partisan politics, as it's made out to be in the press?
Well, I think it is partisan politics because it really depends on which party's in control as to how the congressional lines are drawn and whether it becomes a pro-Republican district or a pro-Democrat district. And I think in Lou's case, having a Republican House and Senate, which hadn't happened in a long time, for the next 10 years, it's a big difference. I don't think a whole lot changes in South Carolina. We've had 6 congressional districts. We get an additional that I think is going to be created a Republican district. So what we're going to have is 6 Republican districts and 1 Democratic district, and our senatorial districts will still be Republican based on how red a state South Carolina is. So for us, not a whole lot of change. I think Luke can allude there's going to be a lot of good changes for him in North Carolina.
Yeah, we certainly saw Governor Perdue bring out her red veto stamp several times in this last session. Should we expect more of that heads coming together, so to speak?
Well, I think when you get past the use of the veto stamp, I think what we've been encouraged by with a lot of things we did this session, almost every bill we passed, most of which was signed by the governor, was done on a bipartisan basis. So I think despite the partisan control of the legislature, I think we have folks on both sides of the aisle that are still focused on the same big thing. How do we get our state back to work, and how do we do the right thing to keep business growing and coming to our state? I think when it comes to redistricting, there'll probably be some pretty significant changes in our state. I think a lot of the congressional maps certainly see situations where Democrat incumbents will be paired up against each other. So the number of Republican seats could likely grow 2 or 3. I think in the legislative races, there's a handful of Republicans actually that are running against each other too, as well as some Democrats that are running against each other. And in the House, there'll be 14 brand new seats without an incumbent. So there'll be a lot of change and a lot of new faces. But again, I think, we're still focused on how do we get the best people to run? How do we get people that are business minded? This isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. It's about what's pro-jobs and what's pro-economy. So we'll continue to look for the best way forward to kind of get the right folks together to work on the right issues to get things done for our state. Switching away from politics for a moment to corporate earnings announcements. Several have come out as of late with really record earnings, which is fairly remarkable when you consider this environment. But is that revenue driven in most cases, or are we seeing the benefits, so to speak, of the recent cost cutting that a lot of corporations have done? What's your take?
Mark, I think it's the latter. I think businesses have, over the last 3 years, have gone back into their core functions. They've got things down to, what it takes for them to survive. I think they've become more productive, more efficient in their processes over this time. And I think you'll continue to see businesses move in that fashion. But what we're seeing in South Carolina is most of our businesses are cash flush. I think as soon as they see a little bit more confidence, if we can have 3, 4, 5, 6 months of continued growth, I think you could see those companies open up, begin investing in plants, begin investing in people. But right now, I think it's just a real question of what's going to happen. And it's kind of like holding their powder right now, and that powder is money gains is showing up on their bottom line, but it's most of it's cost cutting.
Well, capital sitting on. Well, I think I think it's consumer confidence, but I think it's also business needs confidence coming out of their federal government, and we've seen a lot of activity over the last several years out of regulatory agencies, whether it's EPA, OSHA, environmental regulators, the National Labor Relations Board, and they start talking about things that really scare business owners and CEOs, and it creates a cloud of unpredictability where if you don't know, what's the part per million EPA regulation going to be on clean air, it's a big deal. So I think having some certainty and some great signals coming out of Washington that they're really committed to helping the job creators do things that will get the economy going, I think that's not the reason, but it's a reason why a lot of companies are sitting on cash. And unfortunately, some of them are probably some of the same companies are looking at investing them in other countries where those countries provide a greater degree of certainty. So you'd like to think that our country can be that country that says, this is the country that's open for business. We're serious about growing jobs here, and we're serious about sending those signals.
Are there advantages of moving some of your business model offshore and concentrating on core, more profitable sectors of a business? Are there companies in your states that have done so?
I'm sure there are, but there's also good examples of companies that are moving operations back into the state because whether it's quality of workmanship or just transportation costs, in some cases it's more effective and efficient to make it here. You saw an announcement recently by the head of Ford Motor Company indicating that because demand for their product is growing worldwide, they're actually hiring more people in America. So I think it's probably no longer, as Otis described earlier, the jobs aren't going to the place where they can be done for the cheapest. I think you're going to see the high-quality, high-cost jobs go where they can be done the best. And we want to make sure our states are on that list.
About 15 seconds. Same thing happening in South Carolina?
I would say that as some of these countries like India and China continue to develop and their per capita income goes up, their costs increase. So that's part of it. The second piece of it is, I think if you saw the 60-minute article probably about a month ago where they were interviewing Cisco, and some of those folks are holding billions of dollars offshore that they would really like to come back into the United States. We got to change tax policy and some of the same things that Lou talked about earlier. We got to change that. If we can, that money will come back on
Gentlemen,
shore.
Thank you. We'll see you next time on Carolina Business Review.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. And by Novant Health, a not-for-profit group of hospitals and physician clinics, ranked as one of our nation's 10 best healthcare systems, caring for patients and communities in North and South Carolina. Major funding also by King & Spalding, an international law firm with over 800 lawyers in 13 offices worldwide, providing legal services to clients in the Carolinas and throughout the world. For more information, visit www.kslaw.com. Additional funding provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. There's a place for those who subscribe to the theory that business doesn't have to be boring. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries, headquartered in Hartsville since 1899. And by viewers like you. Thank you. You may write us at Carolina Business Review, 3242 Commonwealth Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28205.